Trench warfare. Everybody's heard of it, from learning it in school to listening to your grandma. But what was it really like for the soldiers involved? I'm Millie Bedford Foster, a journalist from Cornwall, and I found out.
But first, why were trenches dug in the first place? The failure of the Schlieffen Plan forced the Germans to dig trenches to escape rapid gunfire. The British and French shortly did the same. From there, both sides attempted and failed to outflank the other. This became what was known as the Race to the Sea, which resulted in over 400 miles of trenches being dug from the English Channel to Switzerland. These trenches tended to be poorly built, as they were often hurriedly dug. In some places, like the River Somme, the ground was chalky, which made the ground easy to dig up. The fine dirt meant that the trench sides would crumble when it rained. To combat this, the trench would be built up with wood and sandbags to keep the trench stable and to prevent flooding. Trenches were always dug in a zigzag shape, as that meant if a shell was fired, it would only affect one area of the trench and made rapid gunfire in a straight line practically useless. So, all this being said, what was everyday life like for the soldiers of World War I? I interviewed John Oldman, who fought for the British Army between 1914 to 1928, to find out more. Hi John.
Hi there.
Hiya. Yeah, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So, could you tell us about your time in World War I?
Well, firstly, it was horrible in them trenches, but we had this duty called Stand 2. And Stand 2 make sure that we all had to be up and ready before dusk every morning, because any attacks would happen around dusk and dawn. There was always somebody on duty but keeping an eye out for the people attacking us.
So, what were your duties?
Well, they were all split into 3 groups. 30% of us was always on guard. That's the most important thing, on guard, making sure anything was caught early. The second group would go and get firewood and water and things like this. And the third was always resting.
So, what would you do when you were resting?
Well, most of the time it's rest, or eat, sleep or something like that. But when we were awake, we got a bit of banter, we sing some rude songs, make some songs up. That was always good fun. And also there was one battalion that we believe that made the newspaper.
Did they?
Yes.
So, would you talk to your family members? Did you write to them at all?
Yes, we write as much as we can. We have to make sure things look dandy in camp.
Yeah.
We don't want to put anything untoward there, because it might make the family feel good for us, happy for us. And also, we don't want to give anything away to the enemy either.
Would they get inspected?
There would be letters would be inspected very closely, just in case we was giving anything away, and they would be returned to us or rewritten.
So, what was the food like in trenches?
Food was usually stew or biscuits. Occasionally we had a little treat, bit of jam. We had rum. That was nice.
Did you have any water at all?
Yeah, water always tasted of chloride because it had to be made pure, and that's what does it.
Yeah. So, how was it like for stress-wise? Was that?
Oh, there was a lot of psychological problems. There was some people that really shouldn't have been there, but they had to be there because there's nobody to replace them. And if they didn't stand up and fight, they would have been shot.
So, did you know anybody that did have these disorders, like shell shock or anything?
Yes, I knew some friends that had shell shock all the time, and like I say, these people that they suffered for it, not just when they was in war, but they suffered years and years and years afterwards. Very bad.
Well, I don't want to remind you too much of your time in war. You've been spectacular today. Thank you very much. Very enlightening. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
John's depiction of shell shock was more common than you would think. Over 250,000 men suffered from shell shock during or after the First World War. But what even was it? The term shell shock was first coined by Charles Myers, who was a medical doctor in World War I. At the time, people thought shell shock was caused from physical injury to the nervous system after a shell attack. However, later it had become evident that men who had not been subject to it were just as traumatized than the ones who were. It was a fairly new illness that had never been seen before on this scale, which meant it was badly understood by doctors, officers, and even the victims themselves. In the postmodern world, shell shock is typically known as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. But shell shock only scratches the surface of illnesses plaguing the soldiers of World War I. I got in contact with Lexi Pierce, a World War I historian, to find out more.
Illnesses and diseases ran rampant in the trenches, from the well-known trench foot caused by mud and soggy feet to tuberculosis, a bacterial infection on the lungs. One disease, which was pretty severe, was a disease called pediculus humanus, or more commonly known as trench fever, which affected 500,000 soldiers. It was a louse-borne disease, mainly caused by the sheer amount of lice crawling everywhere in the trenches. It would give the victim flu-like symptoms, with dizziness, weakness, and rashes. To try to combat this, soldiers disinfected their clothes, and delousing stations were set up to rid soldiers of any lice. One treatment of trench fever was passing an electrical current through the infected area, which was quite effective. Another disease in the trenches was trench mouth. This disease was where the gums would be attacked by an overgrowth of normal oral bacteria, which would cause bleeding, ulceration, loss of gum membranes, and bad breath. It made the gums very painful, which made eating, swallowing, and horridly enough, even talking hard to do. The bacteria was a combination of poor oral hygiene, excessive smoking, poor diet, physical and emotional distress, and a lack of rest. This just shows that the soldiers of World War I were brave for not only fighting, but for putting up with these illnesses also.
Illnesses weren't the only thing hurting the soldiers of World War I. As trenches ended the fast-paced war of movement and commenced the start of a general stalemate, they needed to adapt a different way of fighting. This new way of fighting was simply called trench warfare. Very large guns behind the trenches would fire shells to try to blow holes in the enemy's barbed wire, so soldiers could crawl through. However, this hardly ever worked, and more often than not, the shells would just make the barbed wire more tangled. A way of fighting in this way was called going over the top, and was when the soldiers would climb out of their trenches with their weapons and run towards the enemy trenches. Once there, they would jump into the enemy trenches and shoot them, or sometimes they would fight hand to hand. But what weapons did the soldiers fight with? I talked to weaponry expert Will Tyndall to find out more.
Well, artillery shells were the main weapon of World War I, of course. They're fired from large guns over long distances. Enemy trenches would be attacked for hours or even days before a big attack as a way to soften them up of sorts. Another weapon was rifles and that sort of thing, like the bayonet, which realistically is just a really big 40-centimetre knife. Rifles were the standard weapon given to British troops and could fire 15 to 20 bullets per minute. Grenades, handheld bomb, they were used as well. But a bigger gun was the machine gun. That could fire 10 bullets a second, and it killed 200,000 French soldiers in the first week of the war alone. However, it was very heavy and required a full crew to work it, and it would break down pretty often. Gas attacks were pioneered by the Germans in April 1915 and could burn, they could blind, they could even suffocate soldiers. But it wasn't that useful in the end, because it could change direction with the wind, and soldiers figured out if they urinated on their handkerchiefs and held it over their noses, it would stop them from suffocating. So in the end, it was mainly used as a weapon of threat.
Weapons, illnesses, conditions in the trenches all contributed to the harrowing memories the soldiers have of World War One. From shell shock plaguing the mines to rapid shell fire, they all contribute to the image of trench warfare we still have today, even 100 or so years later. The real lives of the soldiers of World War One was hopefully shown to you in this documentary and can help you sympathise with them. I'm Lily Bedford Foster, and this was Army Dreamers.
Next time on Army Dreamers, I find out how the Nazis rose to power and how our world now may reflect that of 1930s Germany.
I'm Lily Foster, and this was...
Oh, you can't put it right at the end. Better than having the raw steak because it was bad. What have we done? What have we done wrong then?
Hello? Still coming, Margaret.
A bacterial infection. Oh.